complex theory, etc. And I think for me, the biggest issues is if you look at the definition of complexity, it's generally defined something like, it's a state that occurs when there's a network of interconnected agents and where those agents have a certain amount of autonomy. So when you have a network of interconnected agents, those agents have autonomy, then it's unpredictable, really, to a large extent, what may happen in that environment. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't elements of complexity that aren't ordered, and it doesn't mean that there's elements of complexity that is ordered. Complexity always consists of elements of order and disorder, and this idea of complexity being the opposite of order is absolutely it's incorrect. It's like comparing apples with oranges. Complexity always has elements of order and disorder, and I think sometimes when you look at some of the examples that are given, I know I've heard one recently where someone gave an example that when you decide that everyone drives on one side of the road, you've markings on roads, you've road signages, you've traffic lights, etc. That's an example of maybe a clear, simple, ordered system. I.e., it's not, they're suggesting it's not complex, but of course it's complex. There's still agents that are within that environment that have the freedom to behave outside of those rules, have freedom to behave by traveling on the wrong side of the road, have freedom to behave in unexpected ways at traffic lights. Once a system is complex, it's always complex. You cannot make it uncomplex. Okay, and that's one of the biggest issues I have, where people are suggesting that we can take situations, environments, and using, I suppose, human constraints, turn it into something that isn't complex. For me, that is incorrect. It goes against the very definition of complexity. And interestingly enough, and I was only given this example very recently, I'm in a city here, and I remember maybe a few months ago traveling through one of the oldest parts of the city, the access points to the city. And just remembering again, we had all those traffic lights, we had all the rules of the road, we had, I suppose, people traveling on left, right. But next thing, in the previous days, a whole crater had opened in the road at that access point. Okay, so no matter how much effort humans put into creating an ordered environment, the underlying system reality is always complex, and it has the ability to behave in unexpected ways. In the same city here, actually, only maybe in the last week, I remember traveling through one of the newest parts of the transport system in the city, and traveling down an access road to the motorway. And next thing, there was a car coming the wrong way, being driven by an older person who obviously wasn't used of the new system, had misread maybe signs, and was traveling in the wrong direction, up a one-way road system. So again, an example, no matter how much order we believe we're putting on a situation, people have agency to behave in unexpected ways because they are complex systems. You cannot take the complexity out of complex systems. You cannot fix complex systems. They are always complex. Okay, so I do and I do smile when I see maybe certain advocates suggesting that the most important things as humans, we move systems out of complexity into maybe complicatedness or clarity or whatever else. It doesn't happen. It doesn't work. In fact, in an area I'd be very active in design, we normally, and I always say a good designer always assumes a situation is always complex. We design with and around complexity. You don't assume the system is simple. You don't assume it's complicated. You always design assuming, rightly so, that the situation, the environment is complex. Now, the unfortunate thing, and that's why I think people are mangling the concept of complexity, is we can see then in organizations, we're nearly designing organizations thinking we can remove the complexity from networks of employees, customers, etc. Again, we can't. We need to learn how to work with it. And of course, as humans, we're dealing with complexity every day of our living lives. Okay, we're actually evolved to work with complexity. We are, I suppose, creatures that are designed as generalists. We're not specialists. Okay, and we're, I suppose, really adept of then working in areas of complexity, except when we go into our organizations. Very often our organizations are removing, I suppose, our ability to respond, because we have to be specialists in an area. We have to behave in a certain way. Uh, we're removing the ability of people to think, to behave with a certain amount of freedom. We take autonomy away from people, yet that autonomy is really important when working with complexity. And that's part of my argument that, we really need to re-empower people within organizations to be able to make better decisions and take better actions. And I think, I suppose the unfortunate thing is that a lot of these people that are talking about complexity, a lot of our organizations nearly see us as, like I said recently, Lego people, as if we're nearly plastic, as if we don't have our own thoughts, beliefs, emotions, etc., as if we're not guided by those thoughts, beliefs, emotions. And essentially, again, it's removing that autonomy and removing, I suppose, the assumption that people have agency. Now, the other side of that coin is when you do that, you're asking people to turn up to their organizations in a certain way every day. So even though we may have a lot of diversity come into work in the morning, we're all being asked to nearly wear the same mask, think in the same way, behave in the same way, feel in the same way. Is that really embracing diversity? Don't think it is. And yet again, diversity is absolutely critical to the ability to survive, to thrive with complexity. And it reminds me, and it was a story from Dave Snowden, where I think he was trying to explain, maybe the difference between chaos, complexity, and I think it was maybe order. Now, for me, that isn't comparing like with like anyway. But the unfortunate thing was the example, in my opinion, was so poor. It was talking about maybe an example of complexity would be maybe a way you would run a children's birthday party, a young children's birthday party. Now, the really unfortunate thing was, and there are many unfortunate things about the story, was first of all, it was one person that was literally making all the decisions and that was imposing a view of how it should run on everyone else, including the kids, etc. Now, that can make sense. I'm not sure it's the right way in fact, I'm fairly sure it's not the right way of engaging with complexity. But in some cases, you may decide, look, for the sake of a quiet life, easy life, let's impose an order on the way the party's been run. But I don't think that is an example of how complexity should be run. Again, it's not giving voice to others within the system, and yet all of those potential voices have agency in the system. So just because Dave decides he's going to impose rules, constraints, as he calls them, within the I suppose the running of the birthday party, doesn't mean all agents will behave as he wants them to behave. In fact, I'm fairly sure with kids, if he turns his back and goes outside the door for 5 minutes, everything will have changed by the time he comes back in. For me, there's a far better way of working with complexity, which is working with people, not imposing order, so-called order on people. Again, it's maybe designing it with people, maybe a way forward with people. So you sit down, not particularly. Maybe I'm not into the designing parties for kids, but maybe you sit down with the kids beforehand, and you say, look, what would you like to do as part of this party? Maybe they can agree some rules, etc., for themselves. They can be agreed, but essentially they're participants in the arranging, organizing, running of that party. Now, the opposite to that, and I think I see this creeping maybe in Dave's thinking as well. This I call it a colonization, where we're imposing a way of thinking, being, doing on others. Yeah, you might get short-term results with that, but it's not a longer-term solution to engaging with complexity. You cannot, as I said earlier, you cannot manage complexity out of complexity. You cannot control complexity out of complexity. You cannot fix complexity. You have to engage with it. And of course, complexity is what gives opportunity to us all. If there was no complexity, okay, it probably means there's no agency. Okay, if there's no agency, there's no leeway to really contribute. Complexity is a positive, and yet a lot of these people pitch it like it's a negative. It's something we must get rid of. Okay, as I said earlier, all of us, every day of our living lives, work with complexity. We know how to do it. Okay, the unfortunate thing is this approach in organizations, and the colonization, where some people's view of what this system should look like seems to be preordained with more important than others. In some cases, people are just seen as sensors. We gather information from them, and then it goes up to someone else who makes the decisions and imposes some sort of maybe constraints or some sort of leeway on the rest of the people. Okay, it doesn't work, in my opinion, long term. In fact, a lot of our research shows that a more viable way is where you embrace people's agency. You give them autonomy to work together to solve problems. Look, I could go on forever and a day about it. I feel very strongly about it, but maybe we'll move on to the next question before we finish up.